Welcome to The Deep Dive. We're the podcast where we try to make sense of complex global events and, give you the key takeaways. Today, we are diving deep into a conflict that's gone from, well, decades of tension to outright war really, really fast. We're talking about the intense recent clashes between Iran and Israel.
That's right. And specifically, we're looking at what really kicked things off recently, this Operation Rising Lion, back in June 2025. It's a situation that, frankly, has the whole world watching and asking, how on earth did we get here? And what does it all actually mean?
It's incredibly complex, incredibly layered.
It really is. And our mission here in this deep dive is to try and unravel some of that complexity for you, our listener. We've gathered information from a whole range of sources, places like Al Jazeera, AP News, Wikipedia for background, and also analyses from think tanks like the German Marshall Fund and the Atlantic Council, different perspectives.
Diverse sources.
Exactly. The aim is to give you a clear, sort of structured way to understand this really tangled relationship.
Yeah.
We'll trace the history, look at the outside influences, the interferences.
Yeah, and pinpoint those key moments, those escalations that led us to where we are right now.
We'll pull out the most crucial insights, maybe even some surprising facts, just to help make sense of this intricate dance between these two major regional powers. It's not just about what happened, right? It's about the why and the implications, which are huge.
That's the mission, and it's a crucial one, I think, because to really get a grip on the present, you have to look back, sometimes surprisingly far back. Because the fascinating thing here, and maybe the first surprise for some listeners, is that the past relationship between Iran and Israel, well, it's not what you might expect.
Not at all.
Let's unpack those deep roots.
Deep-rooted hostility, the historical foundations.
So it seems almost counterintuitive now, looking at the headlines, but Iran and Israel actually had a radically different relationship not that long ago. Before 1979, Imperial Iran, that's Iran, under the Shah, the Pahlavi monarchy in Israel, they weren't just, polite to each other. They had a remarkably close relationship, allies, effectively, in many ways. A working alliance.
How did that happen? That seems like such an unlikely pairing now.
It really does. But it was all about geopolitical pragmatism. Realpolitik, and shared strategic threats. Both countries back then saw the Arab powers in the region as their main adversaries.
Okay.
For Iran, under the Shah, there was this concern about rising Arab nationalism, potential threats from neighbors.
Right.
And for Israel, well, obviously the Arab states surrounding it were seen as the primary security challenge.
So a common enemy, or at least a common perceived threat.
Exactly. That shared perception created this powerful, though maybe often unspoken, mutual interest cooperation. It wasn't about deep ideology or, cultural connection. It was a partnership born out of necessity. Security concerns, intelligence sharing in a really volatile neighborhood. Can you give us an example? Make it a bit clearer for someone maybe not steeped in Middle East geopolitics.
Sure. Think of it like two neighbors. Maybe they don't hang out. Maybe they're not best friends, but they live on the same block. And there's a common problem threatening both their properties. Maybe it's rising crime. Maybe it's, a zoning issue that affects both houses.
Okay.
They team up. They find common ground because they share a security concern. They might set up a neighborhood watch together or coordinate on fixing a shared fence.
Right. Pooling resources for mutual benefit, even if they don't really like each other much personally.
Precisely. Their properties are safer because they work together, even if they wouldn't normally invite each other for a barbecue. That was essentially the dynamic between Iran and Israel before 79. Pragmatic self-interest.
So a partnership of convenience, maybe, but a strong one.
A strong one, yeah. Pragmatic but effective.
So what happened? What was the massive event, the earthquake, that just completely tore that apart and reshaped everything?
That strong, pragmatic partnership just completely imploded with the Iranian Revolution of 1979. And this wasn't just a small shift. This was a tectonic shift, not just for Iran, but for the whole region, the whole balance of power.
Right.
The pro-Western Shah, the Pahlavi monarchy, was overthrown violently and replaced by this fiercely anti-Western theocratic Islamic republic led by Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini.
So a complete ideological flip.
Complete,
Right.
Fundamental, irreconcilable. Moving from that sort of secular pragmatic alignment to this deeply religious anti-Western and crucially anti-Zionist stance.
And the fallout was immediate, wasn't it? What were the very first things the new Iranian regime did regarding Israel?
Absolutely immediate. and very symbolic. One of the very first acts was Iran completely cutting all ties with Israel. Diplomatic ties, economic ties, everything.
Wow.
They withdrew recognition of Israel as a legitimate state, full stop. And then in a move that just echoed across the Middle East, they didn't just close the Israeli embassy in Tehran.
What do they do with it?
They handed it over, symbolically, to the Palestine Liberation Organization, the PLO.
Whoa. Okay, that sends a message.
A huge message. This wasn't just, bureaucratic shuffling. It was a powerful ideological statement. Solidarity with the Palestinians. Total rejection of Israel's existence.
And Khomeini's rhetoric, his own words, really drove this home, right? He called Israel an enemy of Islam.
He did.
Yeah.
And he used some incredibly charged language, famously called Israel the Little Satan.
And the U.S.
The Great Satan. That framing became central to the regime's identity.
How did that translate into, practical policy for ordinary Iranians? Did it affect them directly?
Oh, absolutely. This wasn't just abstract talk. It translated into concrete policies. For example, Iranian passports were explicitly stamped. The holder of this passport is not entitled to travel to occupied Palestine.
So embedding that opposition right into official documents, into everyday life.
Exactly. Making it part of the national identity, official policy. The message was crystal clear. The new Iran does not recognize Israel. Period.
Now, something else that might surprise people is that this deep sympathy for the Palestinian cause, it wasn't entirely created by the revolution, was it? It had older roots.
That's a really important point. It's easy to assume it all started in '79, but no. Iranian Islamists, influential figures like Ayatollah Mahmoud Taleghani, they had a long history of sympathy for the Palestinians. They were raising funds, like Zakat, Islamic charity, for Palestinian causes way back in the 1950s, the 60s.
Really? Even under the Shah?
Yes. And the Shah's government, the Pahlavi regime, they knew about it. They were even a bit suspicious of it at the time. So the revolution definitely amplified it, made it state policy, but the underlying ideological sentiment, that groundwork, it was already there.
And that existing sentiment kind of paved the way for a pretty remarkable early interaction after the revolution, right? Yasser Arafat himself visited Tehran.
He did, a truly historic visit. Yasser Arafat, leader of the PLO, came to Iran in February 1979. He was the very first foreign leader to visit after the revolution.
Wow. What was the significance of that?
Huge significance. The PLO and Arafat, they found the Iranian Revolution deeply inspiring. Think about it. They saw Khomeini, this exiled religious figure, somehow managed to defeat this incredibly powerful U.S.-backed military regime against all odds.
Right. It must have seemed like a new model for resistance.
Exactly, especially at a time when Arab nationalism seemed to be failing Palestinians.
Yeah.
After the '67 war defeat, Jordan kicking out the PLO in '70, Egypt making peace with Israel in '78.
Yeah, the traditional path seemed blocked.
Right. So the Iranian model, this religiously inspired revolution, offered a completely new path, a different kind of inspiration.
But that early sort of revolutionary brotherhood, it wasn't all smooth sailing, was it? There were complications.
Not at all. Despite that initial ideological warmth, practical politics has always got complicated. The PLO tried to mediate during the Iran hostage crisis with the U.S. embassy staff. That didn't work out.
Okay.
And maybe the biggest crack was when Yasser Arafat eventually sided with Iraq during the Iran-Iraq War in the '80s.
Which must have been seen as a huge betrayal by Tehran, given Iraq was the aggressor.
A massive blow to that initial solidarity, absolutely. But here's the crucial part. Despite Arafat's actions, despite the practical shifts, the Iranian leaders maintained their ideological pro-Palestinian stance consistently, unwaveringly.
So they could still claim that mantle, even if their relationship with the PLO leadership soured.
Precisely. It allowed them to pivot their support later on towards other Palestinian groups like Hamas and towards Lebanese groups. The ideology remained paramount.
And that ideological commitment quickly led to a completely new strategy for Iran. A strategy that defines the conflict even today, proxy warfare.
Yes, this is fundamental.
This laid the foundation for what we now call the axis of resistance.
Exactly. After 1979, Iran knew it couldn't match Israel or the U.S. conventionally, military to military. So to project power, to confront Israel, they adopted this asymmetrical strategy. They started actively supporting, funding, training, and consolidating various Islamist Shia parties in Lebanon. Eventually, these groups coalesced into what we know today as Hezbollah.
And Hezbollah wasn't just, loosely affiliated. Iran actively built it up.
Actively. They provided intense ideological indoctrination, rigorous military training, sophisticated weapons and equipment, specifically to attack Israeli and American targets.
So this was the formal beginning of Iran's long game. using non-state actors, proxies, to fight its battles.
It was the start of their core regional strategy, projecting influence, challenging enemies, but without necessarily engaging in direct state-on-state warfare, which carried huge risks for them.
A way to bleed their adversaries without risking direct retaliation on Iranian soil, at least initially.
That was the idea. And this network, the axis of resistance, grew over time.
We're talking about groups like the Houthis in Yemen.
Right, Hezbollah in Lebanon, obviously. Hamas in Gaza, various militias in Iraq and Syria, although, as you noted, the fall of Assad's regime in Syria in December 2024 was a huge blow to that Syrian link.
A major setback for Iran's land bridge strategy.
Definitely. But the overall strategy remains, and Israel has been locked in conflict with these proxies for decades now, since the 1982 Lebanon war against Hezbollah, right up to the recent Gaza war starting in October 2023 against Hamas and others.
So this proxy network allows Iran to maintain pressure, extend its reach across multiple fronts, often keeping the conflict simmering just below the boiling point of direct war. For many years, anyway.
It's been a remarkably effective, if incredibly destabilizing strategy for Iran, protecting them from direct retaliation for a long time while still actively confronting Israel.
We will be right back.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We've just covered the historical foundations, that surprising shift from allies to enemies, the impact of 1979, and the rise of Iran's proxy strategy.
Now let's move into the 2000s and early 2010s, because this is where a new, far more dangerous element really comes to the fore. Iran's nuclear ambitions.
Yes, this cast a huge shadow, an existential one, particularly for Israel.
The nuclear shadow and shifting sands, 2000s, early 2010s.
Absolutely. And concerns about Iran's nuclear program, they weren't new even then. Scrutiny goes back to the 80s and 90s. There was even a formal weapons program called Project AIMEA. Now, a U.S. intelligence estimate suggested it was suspended back in 2003.
Suspended, okay. But the knowledge, the capability.
Exactly. That's the core issue. Regardless of the program's official status at any given moment, whether it was active, suspended, dormant, Israel has consistently viewed Iran's nuclear program as an existential threat.
Not just a problem, an existential threat.
Yes. The fear of a nuclear weapon in the hands of a regime that openly calls for Israel's destruction is deep-seated. And this fear, this perception, has been the primary driver, the unwavering driver of Israeli policy towards Iran ever since. It shapes almost every decision.
And that perceived threat certainly ramped up tensions, didn't it? Especially after Mahmoud Ahmadinejad was elected president in Iran in 2005. His rhetoric was particularly inflammatory.
Extremely inflammatory. And that period, the mid-2000s onwards, saw not just hard-fought words, but a definite increase in proxy conflicts and, crucially, a surge in covert operations. The shadow war intensified.
Right. A prime example of the proxy conflict escalation was the 2006 Lebanon war.
Absolutely. Israel fought a major war against Hezbollah, Iran's key proxy. It wasn't just a skirmish, it was a significant bloody conflict, and it really demonstrated the growing capabilities of Hezbollah, how Iran's investment in them had created a serious fighting force capable of inflicting real pain on Israel. It proved the proxy strategy was working, from Iran's perspective.
And alongside these more open proxy fights, the early 2010s were really marked by this string of, well, clandestine, high-stakes incidents. Assassinations, for one.
Yes, a disturbing pattern emerged of assassinations targeting top Iranian nuclear scientists right inside Iran.
Like Mohsen Fakhrizadeh, though that was later in 2020, but part of a trend.
Exactly. Fakhrizadeh, often called the father of Iran's nuclear program, his killing was part of this ongoing pattern. While Israel never officially confirms these things, they were widely suspected, widely attributed to Mossad.
Bold operations, highly targeted, sending a very clear message.
A very clear message. We can reach you, we will disrupt your program. And it also targeted Iran's nuclear brain trust, trying to slow things down by removing key personnel.
And then there was a whole new front opening up. Cyberspace.
Yes, this became a major battlefield. We saw incredibly sophisticated cyber weapons deployed, like Stuxnet in 2010.
Stuxnet, that was the one that targeted the centrifuges, right?
That's the one. A highly advanced computer worm, believed to be a joint U.S.-Israeli creation, designed specifically to damage Iran's uranium enrichment centrifuges at the Natanz facility by making them spin wildly out of control.
And Flame in 2012.
Flame was more about espionage, a massive data-gathering malware program also targeting Iran. These attacks showed the conflict moving into the digital realm, highly disruptive, potentially damaging, but deniable, non-kinetic, a new dimension to the shadow war.
But the attacks weren't just flowing one way. Iran and its proxies pushed back too, didn't they? There were attacks on Israeli diplomats abroad in 2012.
There were, most notably, a bombing in Burgas, Bulgaria in July 2012. It killed 5 Israeli tourists and their Bulgarian bus driver.
And Israel immediately blamed.
Iran and Hezbollah. Prime Minister Netanyahu was very clear on that. And this wasn't an isolated incident. A senior Israeli defense official stated publicly around that time that Israel had thwarted over 20 planned attacks against Israeli targets worldwide just between May 2011 and July 2012.
20 attacks in just over a year.
That's what they claimed. It really highlighted Iran's efforts to retaliate using its global networks, showing the shadow conflict had spread far beyond the Middle East.
Drones also started becoming a bigger factor around this time, didn't they? More sophisticated incursions.
Yes, that was another technological escalation. Hezbollah itself confirmed it sent a drone, which Israel shot down over the northern Negev desert in October 2012.
And they admitted it was Iranian-made.
Hassan Nasrallah, Hezbollah's leader, explicitly said parts were manufactured in Iran and assembled in Lebanon. Then another drone, also thought to be Hezbollah's, was shot down off the coast near Haifa in April 2013.
What did that signify?
It showed Iran was equipping its proxies with more advanced tech, extending their reach, posing new challenges to Israeli air defenses, moving beyond just rockets.
And the conflict even stretched to places like Sudan. There was that bombing of a munitions factory near Khartoum in 2012.
Right, October 2012. Sudan accused Israel of bombing the Yarmouk munitions factory. Sudan claimed the factory had links to Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC.
Implying it was part of Iran's weapons supply chain.
That was the implication. Possibly supplying weapons to Hamas in Gaza via Sudan. Israel, as usual, didn't confirm or deny, but it fit a pattern of Israel acting, often covertly, to interdict Iranian arms flows to its proxies. It really painted a picture of this incredibly wide-ranging, shadowy conflict, reaching deep into Africa. No geographical boundary seemed off-limits.
In this pattern of sabotage, it wasn't just distant factories. It hit closer to home for Iran at their own nuclear facilities.
That's right. There were reports of explosions, fires, mysterious incidents at sensitive sites like the uranium conversion facility in Isfahan and the enrichment plant in Natanz back in 2011-2014, also at military explosives factories. And again, later incidents like a major power outage at Natanz in April 2021 were widely attributed to Israeli sabotage, to Mossad. These weren't random accidents. They seemed like deliberate, persistent efforts to disrupt and delay Iran's nuclear progress right at the source.
Now, during this period, Iran was also expanding its regional influence, even while some relationships were shifting. Sudan, for instance, started moving away from Iran.
Yes, that's an interesting example. Sudan had a military cooperation deal with Iran back in 2008. But after the Syrian civil war began, and particularly as Sudan aligned more with Saudi Arabia in the Yemen conflict, they reduced ties and eventually severed them completely by 2015-2016.
But Iran adapted, didn't it? It focused its efforts elsewhere, particularly in Yemen.
It absolutely did. Shows their strategic flexibility. Even as the Sudan relationship cooled, Iran ramped up support for the Houthi movement in Yemen. They'd been supplying weapons since at least 2012. More systematically, the IRGC established logistical air bridges, flying in military supplies, advisors. They really invested in building up the Houthis as another key proxy.
So expanding their reach into a different but strategically vital area, the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, pressure on Saudi Arabia.
Exactly, allowing Iran to maintain pressure on key adversaries and strategic waterways, even without a direct confrontation. It just shows Iran's persistent, long-term strategy. Cultivate and equip proxies across the region, adapt when necessary, but keep expanding that network of influence.
We will be right back. Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We've covered the historical background, the emergence of the nuclear threat, and that intense period of proxy conflicts and shadow warfare in the 2000s and early 2010s. Now we move into a really critical phase, 2015 to 2018. This period saw a major diplomatic attempt to resolve the nuclear issue, the JCPOA, which then spectacularly unraveled, setting the stage for the current escalation.
Yes, this is a pivotal chapter in the story.
The JCPOA and its unraveling, a decade of escalation, 2015-2018.
So this chapter really kicks off with the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the JCPOA, signed in July 2015. This was a huge diplomatic achievement, really. It involved Iran and the P5+1 countries. That's the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council, US, UK, France, China, Russia, plus Germany. And the EU was involved too.
Right. A big international effort. What was the core deal?
The core bargain was this. Iran agreed to significantly freeze and roll back key parts of its nuclear program, limiting enrichment levels, reducing centrifuge numbers, redesigning a heavy water reactor so it couldn't produce much plutonium, things like that.
Okay.
And crucially, Iran agreed to unprecedented international monitoring and verification by the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency. Inspectors would have much greater access.
And in return?
In return, the crippling multilateral sanctions that had been imposed on Iran over its nuclear program would be lifted, particularly sanctions related to oil exports and banking.
So the idea was transparency and limits on the nuclear program in exchange for economic relief.
Exactly. And for many observers, for the countries involved, this looked like a potential breakthrough,
Yeah.
a diplomatic pathway to prevent Iran from getting a nuclear weapon and maybe, just maybe, de-escalate tensions more broadly. A chance to turn a page.
A rare moment of perhaps optimism in a very troubled relationship.
For some, yes.
Yeah.
But that optimism, that diplomatic structure, it was dealt a massive blow in May 2018.
When the U.S., under President Trump, pulled out.
Unilaterally pulled out. President Trump essentially voided the U.S. participation in the deal.
Why? What was the rationale given?
The administration argued the JCPOA was fundamentally flawed. They felt it didn't adequately address Israel's core security concerns. Israel itself was deeply critical of the deal from the start. And crucially, the Trump administration argued the deal didn't do enough to curb Iran's other destabilizing activities, its ballistic missile program, its support for proxies like Hezbollah and Hamas.
So the argument was it only focused on the nuclear file, and the sanctions relief actually funded Iran's bad behavior elsewhere.
That was precisely the argument, that the sunset clauses in the deal, where some restrictions expired over time, were too weak, and the money flowing back into Iran would fuel its regional aggression.
And this unilateral U.S. withdrawal, it wasn't just symbolic. It had immediate, tangible consequences for the deal and for Iran's nuclear program, didn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Immediate and profound. The U.S. didn't just withdraw. It reimposed harsh sanctions, maximum pressure, they called it. In response, after waiting about a year to see if Europe could salvage the deal economically, Iran began to incrementally step back from its own commitments under the JCPOA.
How so? What did they start doing?
Most critically, they started enriching uranium beyond the limit set by the deal, both in quantity and at an enrichment level, creeping closer to weapons grade. They installed more advanced centrifuges. And perhaps most alarmingly, from an international perspective, the IAEA, the nuclear watchdog, progressively lost its ability to fully monitor what Iran was doing. Iran restricted access to some sites, turned off surveillance cameras required under the deal.
So the transparency, the verification mechanism started to break down.
It eroded significantly,
Huh.
which meant the international community had less and less visibility into Iran's activities, increasing anxiety about how quickly Iran could potentially break out, produce enough fissile material for a bomb.
Let's try another layman's example here, because this is crucial. Imagine, again, you have that detailed agreement between rivals to stop building up weapons, right? And you have that neutral referee, the IAEA, watching closely to make sure everyone sticks to the rules.
Okay.
Now, imagine one of the most powerful parties who helped negotiate the deal suddenly walks away, says, "I'm out, and I'm putting penalties back on you."
Right.
What incentive does the other side have to keep following the rules, especially when the referee is now being blocked from watching properly?
Very little incentive. The trust is shattered. The core bargain is broken.
It potentially just leads right back to an arms race, doesn't it? With more suspicion, less information, and a much higher risk of things going wrong.
That's essentially what happened with the JCPOA withdrawal. It dismantled the primary diplomatic framework we had for managing the Iranian nuclear issue.
And significantly heightened tensions.
Hugely. It laid the groundwork for more clandestine operations, more friction, and ultimately it helped pave the way towards the open conflict we're seeing now.
It sounds like it created this really dangerous new dynamic.
It really did. Iran felt arguably less constrained. They could say, well, the U.S. broke the deal first, so we're no longer bound by its limits. They felt more justified, perhaps, in accelerating their nuclear activities.
And from Israel's side?
From Israel's perspective, Iran's acceleration was confirmation of their worst fears. It turned the threat from a managed risk under the JCPOA into an immediate, intensifying existential concern.
Creating this dangerous feedback loop, escalation feeding escalation.
Precisely. With diplomacy effectively off the table, or at least severely wounded, the space for non-military options just shrank dramatically. Mistrust soared. The path towards confrontation widened.
We will be right back.
Welcome back to the deep dive. We've covered the history, the nuclear shadow, the diplomatic roller coaster of the JCPOA and its collapse.
Hmm.
Now we enter the really intense period, 2019 right up to 2025. This is where the shadow war really heats up, spills over, and we see the dawn of open conflict, years of tension boiling over. This is where things really accelerate towards direct confrontation.
Escalation in the shadows and the dawn of open conflict, 2019-2025.
A absolutely key battleground for the Iran-Israel proxy fight, especially in the years leading up to 2024, was Syria, the Syrian civil war, raging since 2011.
Right. Syria became a chessboard for regional powers.
For Iran, Syria was strategically vital. Their goal was to establish what analysts called a Shiite corridor, or land bridge.
What does that mean exactly?
It means creating a secure, contiguous land route stretching from Tehran through Iraq, across Syria, reaching Damascus, and ultimately the Mediterranean coast near Lebanon.
Why was that so important for Iran?
Logistics and power projection. It would give them a direct, reliable land route to supply their most powerful proxy, Hezbollah, in Lebanon, moving weapons, personnel funds much more easily and securely than by air or sea, which were vulnerable to interdiction.
And Israel saw this as
A nightmare scenario, an existential threat. They were deeply concerned about Iran trying to Lebanonize Syria, turn it into another launch pad for attacks, embedding proxy forces right on Israel's northern border.
they were worried about permanent Iranian bases, advanced weapons moving in.
Exactly. Transferring significant military assets, maybe even naval capabilities on the coast, fighter jets. They feared this solidifying axis of resistance right up against the Golan Heights.
Let's use that chess analogy again. It sounds like Iran was trying to build a direct highway for its pieces right up to Israel's king.
That's a good way to put it. A direct supply line across the Syrian border to its allies, right next to Israel. And Israel was doing everything it could, airstrikes, covert actions to block that highway, to disrupt those supply lines, seeing it as absolutely critical to its security.
You mentioned Mossad director Yossi Cohen making a chilling comment about this back in 2018.
Yes. He pointed out very starkly that Iran's General Qasem Soleimani, the head of the IRGC's Quds Force, the architect of their regional network, could literally get in his car in Tehran and drive unimpeded all the way to Lebanon's border with Israel.
Wow.
And Cohen added, crucially, that the same route was open for trucks carrying advanced rockets and other weapons for Hezbollah. It just highlighted the very real, tangible threat Israel felt from Iran's entrenchment in Syria.
Fast forward to December 2024, a massive event. The fall of the Assad regime in Syria.
Monumental.
This must have been a huge strategic blow for Iran, right? They even admitted it.
A devastating blow. Brig General Behrouz Esbati, a senior Iranian figure, quite remarkably stated publicly that Iran was defeated very badly in Syria, an open admission of a major strategic failure.
How did it impact their regional plans, that land bridge?
It shattered the land bridge concept. That contiguous corridor was broken. While Iran still has influence through various militias and political ties in Syria, losing the Assad regime as a reliable state partner severely disrupted their primary land supply route to Hezbollah. It fundamentally complicated their logistics, their ability to project power directly onto Israel's northern border, a massive strategic setback, forcing a major rethink of their forward strategy.
Okay, alongside the Syrian battleground, this period, 2019 onwards, saw a dramatic intensification of the shadow war itself. Covert ops, assassinations, cyber.
Absolutely. Things really escalated. A major flashpoint was the U.S. assassination of General Qasem Soleimani in January 2020 in Baghdad.
That seemed unprecedented, taking out such a high-ranking figure from another country.
It was. Soleimani was seen by many as the second most powerful person in Iran, the mastermind of its regional strategy. Killing him was a dramatic escalation by the U.S. Interestingly, the U.S. had apparently warned Iran previously that Israel was trying to assassinate Soleimani, warnings Iran reportedly dismissed.
And Iran retaliated.
Yes, with missile strikes against U.S. bases in Iraq. But the impact of losing Soleimani, decapitating that key part of their command structure, was undeniable. It sent shockwaves through their network.
And just months later, another major figure was killed, Mohsen Fakhrizadeh.
November 2020. Fakhrizadeh, widely considered the head of Iran's nuclear weapons program, assassinated near Tehran, widely attributed to Israel.
Continuing that pattern of targeting the nuclear brain trust.
Exactly. A clear signal of Israel's determination to prevent Iran getting the bomb, using any means necessary.
The shadow war also heated up at sea during this time, right? Attacks on shipping.
Yes, between late 2019 and 2021, there were numerous reports, often attributed to Israeli commandos, of damage to Iranian cargo ships, particularly those suspected of carrying oil, circumventing sanctions or weapons, limpet mines, sabotage.
And Iran retaliated.
It seems so. Several Israeli-owned or managed commercial ships were attacked in the Gulf region and the Indian Ocean, attacks widely blamed on Iran or its proxies. For example, an Iranian intelligence ship, the MV Saviz, stationed long-term in the Red Sea, was damaged by a mine in April 2021, likely by Israel.
So the conflict was spilling out onto international waters, disrupting commerce.
Adding another layer of risk and complexity, yes.
And nuclear facilities remained firmly in the crosshairs, Natanz again.
Yes, April 2021. A major accident described as sabotage affecting the electricity distribution network at the Natanz enrichment facility. This happened right after Iran had started using more advanced centrifuges there. Again, widely attributed to Mossad.
A persistent campaign of disruption.
Ongoing, deliberate efforts to sabotage Iran's nuclear infrastructure at its most sensitive points.
Cyber attacks also ramped up, both ways.
Definitely. It became a constant feature. Iranian cyber groups reportedly targeted Israeli websites, public infrastructure, businesses in 2022. And conversely, a major cyber attack attributed to Israel caused significant disruption at the Khuzestan Steel Company in Iran in June 2022. It showed the digital front was very active, capable of causing real economic and industrial damage, non-traditional warfare.
We also saw these strange, suspicious deaths among Iranian scientists and military officers around 2022-2023. Aerospace scientists, IRGC officers.
Yes, a string of unexplained deaths and incidents. Explosions at sensitive military sites, scientists dying under unusual circumstances, naturally fueling speculation of covert operations, assassinations by foreign intelligence services.
And meanwhile, Israel claimed it was thwarting Iranian plots abroad.
Yes. Mossad reportedly disrupted Iranian attempts to attack Israelis in places like Cyprus, Colombia, Turkey, and across Africa between 2021 and 2022. A global cat-and-mouse game. Plus, there was a significant drone attack on an Iranian military-industrial complex in Isfahan in January 2023, again widely attributed to Israel. The clandestine campaign continued relentlessly.
Then came October 7th, 2023, the Hamas attack on Israel.
A brutal, major turning point. Hamas, a key Iranian proxy, launched that devastating attack. Thousands of rockets, militants pouring into Israeli communities, unprecedented scale and brutality.
Triggering the Gaza war.
Exactly. And Israel's response was massive, not just against Hamas in Gaza, but also significantly degrading Hezbollah's capabilities in Lebanon through ongoing exchanges of fire and striking Houthi targets in Yemen, too. A multi-front campaign.
And analysts say this broader campaign had an impact on Iran itself.
Yes, the assessment from various sources, like the Atlantic Council, was that Israel's sustained campaign weakened Iranian deterrence and increased Iranian isolation. Their key proxies took heavy hits.
And interestingly, reports suggested some Palestinians in Gaza were blaming Iran for their suffering via Hamas.
There were such reports, yes, indicating a complex dynamic on the ground, perhaps some growing disillusionment with the consequences of being part of Iran's proxy network, a potential crack in that axis of resistance narrative.
So all of this, the shadow war, the setbacks in Syria, the weakening of proxies, leads directly to the immediate prelude to open war. Operation Rising Lion.
June 2025. Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu announces this major operation.
What were the stated targets?
Specifically targeting Iran's main nuclear enrichment facility at Natanz, targeting its nuclear scientists again, and hitting key parts of its ballistic missile program. This was direct, overt, aimed right at the heart of Israel's biggest fears.
The name itself, Rising Lion, very symbolic.
Highly symbolic. It deliberately references the lion and sun emblem of pre-revolutionary Iran, the Shah's era. A clear nod to a different Iran, perhaps implicitly undermining the legitimacy of the Islamic Republic.
And it's also from a biblical verse.
Yes, from the Book of Numbers, about the people rising up like a lion. It suggests a kind of historical or even divine justification being invoked for the operation. Powerful symbolism.
And crucially, this wasn't launched in a vacuum. The US and UK knew it was coming.
Reportedly, yes. Key US and UK defense officials were aware of Israel's plans. This suggests a degree of international coordination, or at least foreknowledge, and perhaps tacit approval.
Meaning the stage was set, the long shadow war was finally breaking cover.
Exactly. The scale, the specific target's leadership, nuclear sites, missiles, signaled this wasn't just another retaliatory strike. This was a concerted, pre-planned effort to dismantle core elements of Iran's strategic power. Open conflict had begun.
We will be right back. Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We've traced the long arc from uneasy allies to sworn enemies through revolution, proxy wars, nuclear tensions, diplomatic failures, and the final escalations that led to open conflict.
Hmm.
Now we dive into the war itself, June 2025. The actions, the reactions, and the critical intervention by external powers.
This is where the conflict truly explodes onto the world stage.
The war unfolds actions, reactions, and external interference, June 2025.
So the fuse was lit on June 13th, 2025.
Yeah.
Israel launches Operation Rising Lion, a surprise attack. And the objectives were incredibly ambitious. The initial hours were focused on what you might call decapitation strikes.
Targeting leadership.
Exactly.
Right.
Highly targeted assassination attempts, some successful, some not, against Iran's top military brass, key IRGC commanders, nuclear scientists, and even senior political figures involved in security, like Ali Shamkhani. The aim was clearly to sow chaos, disrupt command and control right at the outset.
And beyond the leadership, the physical infrastructure.
Widespread airstrikes against critical sites. The major nuclear facilities Natanz, Fordow, Isfahan were hit hard. Military bases, command centers, and significantly, a major effort to destroy Iran's air defense systems to allow Israeli aircraft greater freedom of action.
What was the stated goal? Did Israeli officials say what they were trying to achieve?
Publicly, officials later stated the aim was to completely and fully obliterate the nuclear sites. Not just damage them, obliterate them. To inflict so much damage that Iran couldn't reconstitute its nuclear program for the foreseeable future.
A decisive blow, not just a setback.
That seemed to be the intent, a potentially game-changing strategic strike.
How did the Israeli public react to this? Launching a major war like this carries huge risks.
Overwhelmingly supportive, according to reports. There seemed to be a strong consensus that Iran was dangerously close to a bomb, and preemptive action, however risky, was necessary. The government actually saw a surge in public support, even though Israel itself suffered casualties from Iran's retaliation. The fact that Tel Aviv canceled its massive annual Pride Parade because of the conflict really underscores how serious the situation felt across Israeli society, a sense of national emergency.
Now, Iran obviously wasn't going to just absorb this. They retaliated. Operation Severe Punishment.
Yes, from June 13th through to around June 24th, Iran launched its counterattack.
What did that involve?
A significant barrage of missiles and drones fired at Israel. They used some of their most advanced systems, including the Fatah hypersonic missiles designed to be very fast, maneuverable, hard to intercept. Also, Karamshar ballistic missiles and swarms of UAVs or drones, aimed at military targets, but also hitting civilian areas.
What was the impact in Israel? How effective was Iran's retaliation?
Israeli authorities reported over 80 people wounded, mostly lightly, which, considering the number of projectiles, might seem low. Residential buildings were hit in places like Tel Aviv and Tamra near Haifa.
So, damage, but perhaps not catastrophic.
Right. Some experts analyzing the exchange suggested Iran's bark was worse than its bite. That despite the advanced missiles, Iran couldn't really match Israel's surgical and lethal precision.
An asymmetry in capabilities.
It seems so. A technological and perhaps tactical gap. Plus, there were suggestions Iran faced supply constraints. They might have held back somewhat, firing fewer missiles than they could have, perhaps to conserve their arsenal for a longer fight or to maintain some deterrent capability.
The domestic reaction inside Iran must have been incredibly varied. How did people respond?
Hugely complex, yes. On one hand, you had regime supporters, predictably outraged, demanding and backing strong retaliation against Israel and later the U.S., but on the other hand, many ordinary Iranians, especially opponents of the regime, expressed deep sorrow for civilians killed in the Israeli strikes, and real anger at their own government for, as they saw it, failing to provide warnings or adequate protection, like air raid shelters.
Echoes of past wars.
Yes, for many old Iranians, it brought back traumatic memories of the Iran-Iraq War in the 80s, the missile attacks on cities then. But alongside that fear and anger, there was also, immediately after the attacks, a noticeable rally around the flag effect, a sense of national solidarity against an external enemy, even among those who dislike the regime.
Interesting. And you mentioned a kind of quiet defiance, too.
Yes, small acts, like reports of babies being given names with deep historical or political resonance. Arash, the mythical archer who defended Persia's borders, or Nika, the name of a young woman killed in the 2022 anti-government protests. Subtle ways of expressing national feeling, maybe hope for change, while outwardly showing unity.
Now, the huge turning point in this phase, the direct U.S. intervention. They initially start out, right?
Initially, yes.
Yeah.
The U.S. line was, we're not a party to this conflict, but warning Iran severely not to attack U.S. interests. The very fine line they were trying to walk.
But that changed dramatically.
Unequivocally.
Mm.
On June 22nd, 2025, the U.S. military directly joined Israel's campaign. U.S. forces struck 3 major Iranian nuclear sites.
Yeah.
Fordo, Isfahan, and Natanz.
The same ones Israel hit.
The same key sites. President Trump announced them as massive precision strikes aimed at completely and fully obliterating the facilities. Echoing Israel's language, making it clear this was a coordinated or at least aligned effort to dismantle Iran's nuclear program.
And this wasn't out of the blue. There were U.S. military movements beforehand.
Yes, significant moves. Days before the U.S. strikes, the Pentagon authorized major changes to CENTCOM's force posture in the region. They deployed a large number of aerial refueling tankers, KC-135s, KC-46s essential for long-range strike missions. They extended the deployment of the USS Harry S. Truman Aircraft Carrier Strike Group, moved another carrier, the USS Carl Vinson, into position, and placed a guided missile destroyer, the USS Thomas Hudner, in the eastern Mediterranean specifically for air defense.
So, positioning the pieces on the board for direct action.
It looked exactly like that. Building flexible options, signaling readiness, preparing for intervention. It wasn't impulsive.
How did Iran react to being directly hit by the U.S.?
With fury. Iran's foreign minister, Abbas Araghchi, flatly rejected any calls for diplomacy at that point. He said the U.S. had crossed a very big red line, and Iran had every right to defend itself. The rhetoric hardened significantly.
And the Houthis in Yemen, Iran's allies there.
They immediately reacted. The Houthis considered the American strikes a declaration of war. They had already threatened to resume attacks on U.S. ships in the Red Sea if the U.S. joined Israel's fight, and they did fire several missiles towards Israel in response to the U.S. strikes, showing that regional solidarity.
Okay, but here's a really crucial, maybe surprising point that emerged from this initial phase of open war: the role or lack thereof of Iran's other proxies.
This is fascinating and potentially very significant. Despite Iran spending decades building this axis of resistance, reports and analysis suggest that during these critical days in June 2025, most of Iran's proxy militias stayed largely silent.
Silent. When Iran itself was under direct attack from Israel and the U.S.
Largely silent, leaving Iran, as one analyst put it, feeling isolated in war.
Why? What happened to the network?
Well, experts pointed out that key parts of the network, Hamas and Gaza, Hezbollah and Lebanon, and obviously the Assad regime was gone, had already been significantly weakened or badly degraded by Israel's campaigns in the preceding months and years, especially the intense fighting after October 2023. While the Houthis still had teeth and some Iraqi Shiite militias retained capability, the overall network was described by some as a shell of its former self.
So the very network designed to deter attacks on Iran or retaliate alongside Iran wasn't able to deliver when it mattered most.
That seems to be the key takeaway from that phase. The silence was deafening. It wasn't just a tactical failure. It potentially revealed a fundamental weakening of Iran's entire regional strategy and deterrence posture. A huge development, potentially shifting the balance of power.
We will be right back. Welcome back to The Deep Dive. We've dissected the history, the nuclear tensions, the failed diplomacy, and the eruption of open war in June 2025, including the crucial U.S. intervention and the surprising silence of Iran's proxies.
A lot to unpack.
Now, let's look forward. What are Iran's options now? What are the dilemmas they face? What about the nuclear question long term? And are there any pathways out of this crisis?
These are the huge questions hanging over the region right now.
The stakes and pathways forward.
Iran is facing an incredibly difficult set of choices, a real strategic dilemma. Historically, Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, he's generally been quite cautious when it comes to direct confrontation with the big powers, especially the U.S. He wants to avoid a full-scale war that could threaten the regime itself.
The fear of U.S. military might is real.
Absolutely, providing an excuse for Washington to fully unleash its military alongside Israel. That's Iran's nightmare scenario. A joint U.S.-Israeli campaign could potentially destroy even their most hardened, buried nuclear sites and just neutralize their strategic power. That fear acts as a major constraint on their actions.
One potential lever Iran has, though, is the Strait of Hormuz. They've threatened to close it before. How serious a threat is that?
It's a very serious threat, globally speaking. The Strait of Hormuz is this narrow waterway, a critical choke point for global energy supplies.
How much energy goes through there?
About 20%, 1/5 of all the world's seaborne crude oil passes through Hormuz, and maybe 25% of globally traded liquefied natural gas, LNG.
So closing it would have immediate global impact.
Immediate and severe. It would instantly halt the transit of millions of barrels of oil per day. Global oil prices would almost certainly shoot way past $100 a barrel. Massive economic shockwaves worldwide.
Let's use that highway analogy again. It's like closing the main artery for 20% of the world's fuel delivery trucks.
Exactly. Creates instant shortages, massive price hikes, economic chaos.
But could Iran actually sustain a closure? Wouldn't it hurt them too?
That's the critical caveat. Iran's own economy is heavily reliant on exporting its oil through that very same strait. So a full long-term closure seems unlikely. It would cripple their own finances. It's more likely a short-term threat, something they might do briefly, perhaps, if the fighting escalated dramatically, to inflict maximum pain and gain leverage. But probably not a sustainable strategy for them.
So if a direct conventional war is too risky and closing Hormuz is double-edged, what's left for Iran? Asymmetrical warfare.
That seems the most likely path forward, especially now that their conventional options and maybe even parts of their nuclear program have been degraded by the strikes.
What does asymmetrical warfare look like in this context?
It means hitting adversaries where they're vulnerable, avoiding direct military clashes. Relying on the proxy network, even if weakened, is key. Engaging in terrorism is also a possibility, analysts mention. This could mean targeting Israeli or Jewish interests outside the Middle East, using their global networks. It could mean attacking energy infrastructure belonging to U.S. partners in the Arab Gulf states, hitting Saudi or Emirati facilities, for instance, to destabilize markets and punish U.S. allies.
And cyber attacks?
Absolutely. Expect a significant increase in sophisticated cyber attacks targeting critical infrastructure, power grids, financial systems, government networks in Israel, and potentially its allies, including the U.S. It's a way for Iran to strike back, cause disruption, inflict pain, without risking its own conventional forces in a direct fight.
Now, the core issue driving all this, the nuclear program, where does that stand now, officially and practically?
Well, the diplomatic situation deteriorated sharply just before the June strikes. On June 12th, the IAEA Board of Governors formally declared Iran non-compliant with its NPT obligations, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. That was a major step, the first such finding in nearly 20 years.
How did Iran react to that?
Defiantly. They announced plans to build a third uranium enrichment site, likely buried deep underground, and they explicitly threatened to withdraw from the NPT altogether.
Withdrawing from the NPT would be huge, a massive blow to global non-proliferation efforts.
Monumental. It would signal Iran is completely abandoning international constraints.
But paradoxically, even though Israel and the U.S. strikes damaged enrichment plants, could this whole crisis actually accelerate Iran's path to a bomb?
That's the terrifying paradox. Yes, it absolutely could. While the strikes might have destroyed physical infrastructure, they can't destroy knowledge. Iran possesses what experts call irreversible knowledge of the nuclear fuel cycle.
They know how to do it.
They know how. The scientific and technical expertise isn't gone. So they could, theoretically, rebuild the program, perhaps more covertly, maybe in dispersed or deeply buried facilities. And crucially, they might now have an even stronger motivation to get a weapon, viewing it as the only ultimate guarantee against future attacks like the ones they just suffered, the ultimate deterrent.
And the broader implications. If Iran does push for a bomb, or even withdraws from the NPT,
it massively undermines the entire global non-proliferation regime. The NPT framework is based on mutual commitments. If a country like Iran feels attacked because it was pursuing enrichment allowed under the NPT, for peaceful purposes as they claim, it sends a terrible signal.
other countries might think.
Other countries, particularly in volatile regions, might conclude that the NPT doesn't offer security and that developing their own nuclear weapons is the only way to deter attack. You can see a dangerous cascade of proliferation. Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Egypt. You might all reconsider their options. A nuclear arms race in the Middle East. That's the nightmare scenario.
Let's look at the public responses again. Inside Iran, you mentioned the rally around the flag effect, but also discontent. What's the long-term prognosis for the regime's stability?
It's precarious. While external threats can create temporary unity, persistent military pressure, economic hardship exacerbated by conflict, and a sense that the government can't protect its citizens, that could seriously weaken the regime's grip over time. We know from reports, particularly among younger Iranians, there's this deep sense that the regime's hold on power is untenable. They're frustrated by the economy, lack of freedoms. They might not know how change will happen, but a prolonged, costly, and potentially unsuccessful conflict could definitely fuel that internal pressure, potentially leading to more protests or instability.
And in Israel, public support remains strong for the government's actions.
Yes, the reports indicate continued strong backing. viewing the strikes as necessary self-defense against an existential threat, despite the costs and casualties on the home front.
What about international reactions beyond the main players?
Very divided, reflecting existing geopolitical fault lines. We saw expressions of support for Iran in places like Iraq and southern Beirut, Hezbollah's stronghold. Elsewhere, protests against potential wider war, like anti-NATO protests in The Hague, shifting their focus to no Iran war. But simultaneously, within Iran itself, reports of large pro-government rallies in major cities, people waving flags, supporting the leadership against the attacks, a really polarized picture globally.
So, given this incredibly tense, dangerous situation, are there any off-ramps? Is diplomacy completely dead?
It's on life support, but maybe not completely dead. Iran's foreign minister did mention, even amidst the defiance, a willingness to return to nuclear talks if the Israeli attacks stopped. That's a potential conditional opening, however small.
And many observers still think an American brokered deal is the most likely way out.
It's often seen as the only realistic option to get Israel to restrain itself and potentially de-escalate the conflict. The U.S. has the most leverage with Israel.
But the trust issues are huge now, right?
Yeah.
Especially with the U.S.
Massive. President Trump's unpredictable rhetoric, calling for calm one minute, threatening Iran the next, creates instability. And that perception from Iran's side, that the U.S. was deceptive leading up to the Israeli attack, pretending to talk while knowing an attack was planned, that severely damages the trust needed for any serious negotiation.
Plus, the core disagreement on the nuclear front was already there before the strikes.
Exactly. The negotiations were basically stalled, the U.S. demanding Iran give up enrichment entirely, Iran refusing. That fundamental gap hasn't gone away.
And if Iran now truly believes Israel and the U.S. are aiming for regime change,
that makes a nuclear breakout seem more likely, paradoxically. Why negotiate away your ultimate insurance policy if you think your existence is threatened? That said, Iran might still engage in diplomacy as a tactic, a negotiating ploy perhaps, hinting at concessions not because they intend to give up the program, but to ensure the regime's survival by getting the U.S. to pressure Israel to back off. It's complex maneuvering.
So the outlook is grim, prolonged conflict.
The immediate outlook points towards continued conflict, unfortunately. A full, comprehensive nuclear deal seems incredibly remote right now. This Iran-Israel confrontation looks set to dominate the Middle East agenda, reshaping regional dynamics in unpredictable ways for the foreseeable future.
So we've really covered a huge amount of ground. Decades of history, shifting alliances from that unexpected partnership to this deep, bitter hostility. We saw the massive impact of the '79 revolution, traced the really complex story of Iran's nuclear ambitions, the shadow wars, the proxy conflicts.
Watch the diplomatic effort, the JCPOA, rise and then dramatically fall.
Yeah, and then analyze that intense escalation, the external interventions, leading right up to this current state of open, direct conflict.
It's clear how internal politics in both countries, external pressures, and just the relentless pursuit of strategic goals have all tangled together in this incredibly critical region, bringing us to this very, very precarious point.
And our sources really highlight something important. Both the Iranian government and the Israeli government are under immense domestic pressure right now, facing huge internal challenges.
Their futures, politically, maybe even existentially for the regimes themselves, seem, as one source put it, inextricably linked to how this confrontation plays out. The stakes couldn't be higher for the leadership on both sides.
So here's a final thought to leave you with. Given this high-stakes environment, this intense pressure, and the stated aims, whether it's degrading Iran's nuclear program or even whispers of regime change, what unexpected shifts might we see? Not just between Iran and Israel, but across the entire Middle East, if one or both of these deeply stressed political systems undergoes a fundamental change because of this conflict.
What dominoes might fall that we haven't even considered yet?
Exactly. What stands out to you, our listener, as the most unpredictable ripple effect, the most surprising consequence that could emerge from this deep-seated, dangerous rivalry finally boiling over? Something to think about.